Hello everybody, Gooman here. I hope y'all had a chance to enjoy Monster Hunter Wilds over the last week. I know I have. I have about 65 hours in the game now. Hunter rank 90 something. Been enjoying my time a lot. Since most of the other content creators are already busy putting out their guides, their weapon tutorials, their armor builds, and whatnot, I wanted to do something a little bit different and look at the monsters instead. So I went back to the first 3 monsters that you fight over the course of the game and did a small freeform breakdown of them. What I liked, what I didn't like. Not necessarily like a guide or review or anything, just some thoughts. Mainly trying to look at if the early game fights have something that can teach new players, returning players, etc. I hope this video is a nice change of pace for you. I hope you like it. So without further ado, let's get going. Welcome to Monster Hunter Wilds, everybody. So the first monster we're looking at here is the Chatacabra. This guy serves as our punching bag for the game. Monster Hunter games typically like to introduce the first monster as a very easy fight. The purpose of these monsters is to kind of get you introduced to all the game systems that make up what a Monster Hunter is. So this guy in particular, I wouldn't call him dangerous at all. All his attacks are very simply telegraphed. If you're still trying to get used to your weapons and how combat works in general, I would consider the Chatacabra just a step or two above just hitting the target dummy in your camp. So if you're trying to learn weapon combos against a moving target, he's probably a solid go-to, although you probably won't feel like you're in any real danger while you're fighting him. So the Chatacabra does have kind of a powered-up form that he can take by slobbering his arms with his spit and then putting these little rocks on them. And then if you get hit by a punch from those arms, you'll take extra damage. But other than that, not a whole lot changes. Chatacabra's not a bad fight at all. I think he's a pretty good introduction to sort of overall what combat means in this game. He's not a technical fight by any means. It's not super hard to avoid his attacks. He gives you plenty of openings. There isn't any spot on his body that's difficult to hit or anything like that. Nothing to break off. One thing the Chatacabra teaches us very well is the importance of focus mode in Monster Hunter Wilds. He has a small frame and he likes to move around quite a bunch during his attacks. He's not like a big lumbering oaf the same way the Great Jagras was in Monster Hunter World, which was the punching bag for that game for new players. So if you notice, with focus mode engaged, you can see the wounds currently on his body. So that's sort of a normal part of gameplay. As you repeatedly hit body parts, you open up wounds that you can then exploit for big damage opportunities. And on top of that, what Chatacabra introduces, when monsters use certain attacks, what happens is certain parts of their body will light up temporarily as a potential target for focus strikes. So that's your big wound break attack that you can use. For Chatacabra is whenever he does a big attack that involves his tongue, and then he sort of reels for a second, which will give you an opportunity to do a big counterattack on his tongue. I don't think you can cut it off. That'll be pretty scary if you can. However, that does point out something worth keeping in mind. If an enemy does a big attack, you should engage focus mode and see if the same thing happens, right? So maybe a monster has a big fire breath attack. You should engage focus mode and look at their mouths and see if their mouth becomes a temporary weak spot, because that can give you a big damage opportunity. So that's something the Chatacabra teaches us very well. Aside from that, pretty simple fight. In general, with Monster Hunter games, I always wish that there was a purpose to these fights once you're past a certain point in the game. I would love to fight like a stronger version of all these entry-level monsters, especially the Chatacabra. Just as an example off the top of my head, my dream event quest is a Chatacabra fight, but he's, I don't know, 3 times as big, right? And instead of just attaching rocks to his arms, maybe he adds like a blast blight, the ability to punch the ground and create massive explosions. And you can call it raging Chatacabra. That would be hilarious, and I would love to see that. Aside from that, Chatacabra is not bad. I'm not its biggest fan, but I'm not a hater. It works, it does what it's supposed to do, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. Now on to the next monster. The second fight this game introduces is the Quematrice. It's a giant chicken. Its special properties are that, I believe, by shaking its tail, it releases some kind of flammable gas into the air for a second. And then by dragging its body parts along the ground, it creates a spark, which then lights that oil on fire. So it is not a fire-breathing monster. It can just create fire using physics, which is neat. This fight reminds me a little bit of the Kuluyaku, which, if you watch my first video on the channel, I'm a big fan of that fight, unironically. The Quematrice, on the other hand, I don't dislike this fight. I think it's really well designed. It's very fun. It's really dynamic, and the way the fire interacts with the environment, I think is gorgeous. It's a technically impressive fight that they made with this one, I think. Obviously, its big weapon is its tail. That's where all the strong and the hardest to avoid attacks come from. Its sweeps, obviously, is a tough one. This fight's interesting to me because it introduces elemental effects pretty early, which I think is always good. The sooner you know about the presence of different elemental effects in the game, and even letting you play with them, I think is really helpful to make the game fun for new players. I'm doing these fights through the low rank optional fights, and the early game takes place during a dust storm. That's why the colors are all a little washed out. I wish I could show off the absolute beauty of this game, but this is kind of how the game starts you off, which questionable choice, but it's alright. We get past it pretty quick. So one thing this fight does introduce is the idea of breaking the same part multiple times. So right there I broke its tail once, but it's still attached. You can still use the tail as part of its attacks. Right, and by breaking it a second time, its tail can get cut off, which will severely affect the way it can attack. So right there, it tried to kind of create the flammable dust, and it couldn't follow up on it because it doesn't have a tail to create the spark. Earlier I said it creates the flammable parts with its tail. I think I was wrong. I think it's just whenever it shakes its body, it just produces those little chemicals in the air. And don't forget, if you break a piece of a monster, you gotta carve it for that extra item. Quematrice is fun. I really enjoy just the overall design of this monster. It's so interesting. I'm trying really hard to think on the fly about what other monsters there are in these games that just remind me so heavily of like a real world animal. I really like even something like the Zinogre is very obviously a dog. Even that one is still, rooted in fantasy, whereas you have the Quematrice, which is just a big old chicken. I don't know, just looking at it puts a smile on my face. This is another fight I do hope gets, maybe not like a goofy event quest like I mentioned in the last one, but I would definitely love to see different variants of this monster, maybe in the Master Rank expansion, maybe a Thunder Chicken. That would be awesome. Aside from that, I like the fight very much. I think it's interesting enough for an introductory fight. It introduces the idea of elemental attacks without necessarily overcomplicating any of the combat mechanics. I like that the fire attacks kind of work in stages with this fight, so it first has to put out the little dust, and then by following up with the tail sweep for the spark, it then finally does the fire. So it kind of gives you a chance to at least try to avoid it if you can see it coming, unlike a monster that can maybe breathe fire right at your face. The Quematrice gives you the opportunity to at least kind of work around it. And I wouldn't be opposed to seeing more of this monster in the future. So after the Quematrice, the game sends you into the Scarlet Forest, where you are made to fight this one, the Lala Barina, the spider. It's a Temnoceran that was introduced in Monster Hunter Wilds. So I'll say up front, the Lala Barina is my least favorite monster they added in Wilds. This is the only fight I think that I actively dislike. I like all the other ones, pretty much to some extent, even the ones that I find sort of easy or boring or whatever. I think I still enjoy them just because they're new and they do something, at least something interesting. This fight, I mean, aesthetically, it's awesome. It looks great. I love the nest, the red. It's very striking. I love the way it's presented. My big problem with it is that it just jumps around constantly, and I just find that annoying. Like that, it's constantly retreating so you can do the little spores that will paralyze you if you touch them. It is a gameplay mechanic that adds some level of challenge. I just don't find it too fun. That's just me. This is by no means a bad fight. I just find it annoying. And in a game where the entire roster of new monsters are, you know, interesting and fun, Lala Barina is the one that comes up the shortest for me. But that said, I like the visual distinction between sort of its base form, where it's a little bit more tame in the combat, and then the bloomed form, where the back turns into a rose, and it's a lot more aggressive. It uses its little stab attack a lot more often. It forces you to watch out for the paralysis dust, which does kind of make the combat a bit more dynamic if you're into that. I'm trying to think of a reasonable reference to like a ballerina fencer, because this is definitely that kind of fight. So I'm sorry I can't think of a name or a word to better describe it. Again, aesthetically, this fight's awesome. It looks so cool. I love the red on white. The armor set you can craft is also gorgeous. I'm a big fan of that. I just don't like having to reposition constantly in the middle of a combo just so I can hit it once. So the big attack you have to watch out for is that stinger. It'll use the stinger attack throughout the fight, but it does it most frequently while it's bloomed on the back. It sort of uses the flower shape to hide the fact that it has a stinger in there. It's not to be poetic, but you know, the rose hides the thorns, so to speak. I'm not sure if it's helpful to know this, but the little paralysis dust clouds that come down, you can destroy them. If you have a ranged weapon, I'm sure you can just shoot them out of the sky if you really want to, or you can just get out of its range. That's fine too. Overall, I think this fight is just okay. Just being annoying to me personally brings it down a notch below the rest of the fights. It's by no means a terrible fight or anything like that. Again, it's super cool. I love looking at it. And this arena is probably, I mean, there's so many to choose from, but you know, it's very memorable. One of my favorite locations to fight in general, to the point where I do hope we get to see this location used again, and I'm sure we will. It's such a striking, unique area, which does make me assume that Lala Barina will return in Master Rank in some new form or another. Maybe a poison spider, maybe a blast spider. Why not? They made a blast spider in Sunbreak, so why not here too? Or maybe something more interesting, like a water spider. Boy, that'll be terrifying, actually. One thing I'll add about Lala Barina is that it does a lot of weak quick attacks. That's really fun to block if you're using a shield weapon. So if you want to practice your perfect block timings, this might actually be a pretty solid option for you. The telegraphs are very clear. Making mistakes isn't super punishing. It's a quick fight. And if you're wondering, you can break the entire back section that's a flower. You can break it to make it look really sad. So I guess one of the common criticisms of Wilds in general is that the monsters have so little health that you don't really get to appreciate those long-term changes throughout the fight, which is a shame. But hopefully that's something they can address in the post-launch updates. And there's a perfect block counter for the kill. That covers the 3 monsters that I wanted to look at for the video. Obviously, those are the first 3, and I do want to make at least a couple more videos looking at the next few as well. I don't know if I have the bandwidth to cover every single new monster like this. However, if that is the type of content you would like to see on this channel, please leave me a comment below, and I will be happy to oblige. I do enjoy making this kind of video, so if you guys enjoy watching it, I will make some. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.